So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our final panel, and hope that you have some energy left, because this is the youth panel and there's energy up here, so we hope that there's energy.
Recording in progress.
On this other half of the room as well. So this panel, as you see on the slide, is from the Black Star to the Black World and back. I have a panel of 5 young Ghanaians, each passionate about Ghana's future, but each also critical of her status as read from the vantage point of where they each sit today. I think it's a fitting place for us to end as we look forward. And they all sent me something that speaks profoundly to both their commitments to their specific interests, as well as the intersection of their yearnings for the possibilities offered by Ghana's rich, all those things we got. Every day we're talking about potentials, as well as their frustrations with the unfulfilled dreams of the possible. In other words, their heart beats. Their heart beats, as in poor hearts are beating. What we are going to hear this afternoon. Many of these sentiments, of course, are not limited to Ghana. There's a global, heartbeat of young people that resonates, but then we are here today because of the Black Star. So before I make any introductory remarks about the panel, I want to introduce each of the panelists in alphabetical order of their first names. And then I'll share some initial thoughts, then I'll throw some questions to them, a few follow-up, and then open it up to you all. So let me start with Karim. Abdul Karim Ibrahim is a Ghanaian broadcast journalist and a final year MPhil student here at the Institute of African Studies. In other words, one of our own. His my own professional and intellectual home has been here since 1989, and so when we see vibrant students, it's very heartwarming. Karim has close to a decade's worth of experience in media practice. He led the investigations that uncovered how several high-profile Ghanaians in politics, media, show business, sports, etc., including the current Speaker of Parliament, Honorable Alvin Bagbin, and the former Vice-Chancellor of the University of Ghana, Professor Ebenezer Odro-Usu, were successfully scanned in what became known as the Dr. UN Awards, purportedly sanctioned by the United Nations. His current research interrogates choices and preferences of historically colonized people with the appointment of coaches for the men's national football team, the Black Stars, from 1958 to 2022. In this work, he investigates a possible case of what he calls, and I'm quoting him, self-administered prejudice. He recently participated in a very important set of discussions hosted by the Institute here at the University of Ghana on academic freedom, where he fearlessly critiqued troublesome aspects of the academy in Ghana and at UG in particular. Abdul Karim was also a regional Africa editor and contributor to Harvard University's forthcoming project, a global comparative project investigating student agency and student impact on higher education. Please welcome Abdul Karim. Manama Ajman Asante is a journalist also with over 10 years of experience covering politics, gender, and business in Ghana. She earned her undergraduate degree in economics and sociology at the University of Cape Coast and an MA in religion from Union Theological University Seminary in New York, where she's currently pursuing further postgraduate studies. She was previously and famously or infamously the co-host of this, famously, it's okay, let's take it like that, of the co-host of the City Breakfast Show on City FM, one of Ghana's most listened to morning shows. While at City FM, Manama provided a much-needed feminist perspective on national issues and debates. Her most recent work was with the Ghanaian Women Expert Project, which tracked the number of women experts interviewed in Ghana's media. From June 2011 to September 2014, Manama served as the country coordinator of Journalists for Human Rights, a Canadian NGO that promotes human rights and governance stories across Africa. She coordinated the NGOs and trainers' relationships with local journalists and media houses. Manama was recently a fellow at the Writers Institute of Journalism at the University of Oxford and the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington, D.C. She is an outspoken voice on national issues on social media, and her comments are informed by serious links to our history. She has a huge following of mostly admirers and a few haters. And Manama, you're welcome. With us online is Nikita Dede Ajako. She's a Theodore Linnen Fellow at the University of Ghana here, and unfortunately, due to the date change of our conference, she's not able to join us in person and is joining us virtually. She's a researcher in African literary and cultural studies, and also a creative writer herself. Her work critically examines how language affects literary practices and generates meaning through lived experiences. She's interested in the aesthetics of African popular cultural practices, poetry, digital literature, and literary networks. With her creative writing, she explores the intersections between women's health, trauma, language, and belonging. Her award-winning film, which I've seen, 1,000 Needles, documents the stigma relating to women's sexual and reproductive health through the lens of poetry and art. Entirely self-produced, I was deeply impressed by both the brave and the autobiographical elements of the film, as well as its quality. Ampofo is a PhD candidate in the Department of Educational Policy Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a planetary health scholar at the Global Health Institute and the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies, both at Wisconsin-Madison. Against the backdrop of climate change and environmental degradation across Ghana and Africa, Yaoparebia's work focuses on young people's environmental sense-making and movement building as they move across diverse, discursive, communal, and institutional spaces that make up their daily life. While an undergraduate student at Yale University, she and colleagues founded the Yale Young African Scholars Program, an intensive academic and enrichment program designed for African secondary school students planning to pursue tertiary education and who wish to make meaningful impacts as young leaders on the continent. The program subsequently received support from the university, and about 10 years later, if I'm correct, I think it's 10 years later, remains a highly successful mentoring program for youth on the continent. Welcome, Yaoparebia. And last but not least, albeit the youngest member of the panel, Yaminubia Mfojo. When I invited Minubia to be a part of this panel, she was in her final year of high school at SOS Herman International College in Tema. And she expected to be just driving from Tema or wherever it is she lives here. But she's now, because we postponed the program, she's now a first-year undergraduate student at the University of Sheffield, pursuing a degree in law, with hopes of focusing on both international human rights and media law. And yesterday we were trying to persuade her to consider going into entertainment law. She may still consider it. She has a wide range of interests, mainly centered around African art and literature, and due to her love for history, she particularly enjoys literature which questions the political and socio-economic histories of countries like Ghana and Nigeria. Yaminubia also enjoys exploring fashion and music from the continent by tracking trends and talents, which inspire a lot of her personal writing. She says that she's particularly interested in the work of Chimamanda Adichie and Yaa Gyasi, which provides an interesting couple to consider when we speak, Manama like this, when we ask the question of who can speak for Africa. So, before I make a few brief remarks, please let's listen to a clip from Papa Mensa. I was first introduced to Papa in 2010 or thereabouts, and I've followed him ever since.
And so this kind of creates a hierarchy where the production of knowledge, even just the aesthetics of the event and the monetary value attached to it are attached to this foreignness. And so the library, spaces like the library, they shift attention towards more grassroots, localized efforts to sustain this specific kind of black efforts. And so Sylvia's library, like other spaces, they create a network, right? And so we have spaces like Black Girls Glow, which is an initiative by the poet Amadiaka to foster collaborations between women artists with residencies and music albums. Writers Program Ghana is also an example. which uses literature festivals, radio shows, publications to support literary creation in Ghana. So we have these networks, these artists, writers, funders, founders, collaborating with each other, often networking across to sustain their various initiatives. And here again, the idea of ownership, of reclaiming and redefining networks is important because these artists often are positioned and also position themselves as activists and brokers. And activism and ownership here suggest a more critical look at the narratives that they are redefining. And this is important if you think about the euphoria of the Year of Return, those earlier narratives of Ghana rising in terms of the economy. And so such spaces like the library, like Black Girls Gold, these are really important for more critical discussions and more alternative narratives than the official mainstream, often sanitized governmental narratives of Ghana. So an example of this would be the poetry chapbook produced by Henry, which is called Revolution of the Scavengers, which uses the imagery of the loss of water to describe Ghana as a very dystopian space, very violent, full of hardship. And so this produces a very different but perhaps more realistic image of Ghana as a whole, as opposed to the few idyllic places which would be sanitized and touted as representative of the country. So here I'm suggesting that ownership then is spread into the hands of those who create and those who consume, because then they can create the narratives, they can reclaim the narratives that belong to them. And so in this context, when we think about Black Star, I think it still illustrates this realm of infinite possibility within which the artists, the citizens can retake their stories. But here, possibility, the Black Star is not just equating sheer optimism, but rather a more grounded vision of the schism between the memory of what the Black Star was during independence, the optimism then, but now what is now fractured, what is now different. And I think that these spaces, these practices allow for this vision of the Black Star, a more grounded one, where one is able to think about the fractured reality between what it is now and also the vision of what these spaces can produce for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikita. I'm sure that everybody on the panel has something to say in response to what Nikita said. But anyway, weave it into your responses as you wish. This is the first set of questions. So Karim shared something with me, and I'm going to quote him here. He constructed Ghana as deceptive, confused, or perhaps a restless ghost, unable to fully make its transition to the other world. And then he wrote about two Ghanas, one for the elite coalition and the other for the courted diaspora. And as I read that, I remembered a funeral that my family and I attended last year or earlier this year in Teshimungwa, which is one of the suburbs of Accra. Now, moving from our middle-class residents to this funeral, we felt like we drove through about 4 different Ghanas. And the funeral itself was almost a reflection of two Ghanas. There were two funerals in competition side by side in the same space. So I'm wondering whether these different Ghanas, how do you think the youth and the media in particular, because this is a place that you inhabit, could be harnessed in a way to, and remember the earlier question about your own Ghanaianness and the Black Star, could be harnessed in a way to reconstruct Ghana as a site of collective African consciousness and emancipation, if you even think that's something worth thinking about and trying to achieve.
Thank you very much, Prof. So I've never been able to look Prof in the eyes. Look in the eyes? Yes, look in the eyes and tell her I'm not going to be very, very optimistic about this discussion. At every time through the mails, and even today, I just nod. And yeah, so I would hope that the rest of us would be able to do a lot more of the very nice things as I attempt as a journalist and also as just any Ghanaian individual to articulate my views and hopefully also to share with you what I get every time when we open the phone lines for people to speak. So first I'll start with my own understanding, relationship, interaction with Ghana, and then I'll see if I can deal with other bit about what we must do or what we might be able to do. So for me, my understanding of Ghana and generally the sense that I get from people is that there are three things that often come up. And here we're talking about it in relation to the Black Star, because I really think the Black Star is a lie. The first bit is that Ghana, after independence, would be one, the best version of itself for its people, two, an inspiration to its peers, and three, a dream for the global Africa. So here I'm talking about the diaspora and all of that. But over the years, what I have noticed, and I believe many would share in that, is that the first expectation being about Ghana being the best version of itself for its people has itself traveled abroad. And the second has died with the political emancipation that we have seen on the continent. And so once everybody got some independence, that element also died with it. And the third bit, which appears to be the only one standing, is in itself also threatened some way, and I'm going to explain that a bit more. So my view of Ghana and why I think that there are two Ghanas is also inspired greatly by the former director of IAS, Professor Doji Chikata, at her inaugural lecture where she talks about different Ghanas. And that's where I borrowed this idea and view from. And in her lecture, she draws the parallel and, of course, also compares the different Ghanas, how different people are experiencing it, how women are experiencing it very different from men, how farmers are experiencing that very different from people who are working in, say, state enterprises, among many other things like that. And so quite clearly, you can see that in terms of issues like equality, access to good life, among many other things like that, there is clearly a dichotomy that exists. That dichotomy reflects or comes across in this way. So take the current Speaker of Parliament, and I've been very obsessed with him for some time now, because I think that he is a very good example for what we need to continue to talk about, because even in a very obviously divisive, majoritarian, winner takes all politics, somebody like him from the opposite end of things still enjoys a life that, on the average, many people like myself would never get it. He's been in Parliament for, and he's still there, so about 3 decades since the Fourth Republic he's been there. But up to now, if he gets ill or feels even the need to get medical checkup, he can't go to any hospital facility in his constituency, Naboli Kalio. He has to go to Dubai. And that for me, it's an apt representation or manifestation of what the reality is also. And then again, leading into my view that there's one Ghana for the elites because they are in consensus, I'll talk about a man that nobody talks about in this country for very obvious reasons. I've talked about him before on Joy FM, and the then Christian Council Secretary liked it because he couldn't say it, and I could say it because I'm Muslim, and I'm talking about the Chief Imam. He has become, perhaps in his office maybe, the biggest image launderer in Ghana. So look at it from everybody problematic, from thieving politicians to Ponzi schemers to even now the reform Nana Agrada, for Ghanaians would know her a bit more. Everybody just goes to the Chief Imam's place, sit by him, take a photo, and then off you go. There's nothing like critique that comes from that house, absolutely none. On other things, if you look at his, colleagues or contemporaries, so let's take the Ghanaian economy. Now we are back down there in the doldrums all over again. But there was a point, and even today, when we're talking about all of the problems that we have, then the big guys will come out there and pray for the Ghana cedi to rise. They know very well that is not true. But they themselves, because they get whatever it is that they get in this alliance, are able to do that without shame. And it has an impact on all of us. I'm sure in the course of the discussion, we are going to even reflect on that a bit more. Ghana currently faces an existential problem because of Galamsey, the illegal small-scale mining. It is destroying water bodies, destroying the environment and everything. when finally a bunch of clergymen got on their feet and found their voice, and everybody then was listening to them and all of that, what did they do? They sang and prayed for the river and for the environment and all of that. And for me, all of that demonstrates something. So there's one group of Ghanaians obviously feeling the impact, the devastation, everything, and there's the other one that is working in cahoot with those that have the state power and authority to do something about all of these problems, literally doing nothing at all about it. So ultimately, it comes back to the point that I made about what the first expectation of Ghana has become now, that one which has traveled abroad itself. Because today, everybody wants to live. And I know Nanama will talk about that even more. And for me, that is a very important thing that we must reflect on. So when Prof. Ampofo asked about what we could do then to, in this case, I'm talking about young people or media generally, to try and change this narrative, I think that the first thing would be to allow us, and especially for people like her that some of us respect, and
things I want you all to think about, and we'll see if we have space to get to that, is, to me, the level of advocacy and activism among young people seems to have declined, because asking me to, I'll not turn a blind, I mean, I don't even need to turn a blind eye, because I would encourage people to do the kind of activism that I think in the 70s and 80s many of us were involved in. Anyway, so hold that there for any of you to speak to, what has happened today, that the youth seem often to be in cahoots, if you like, with the people you've described, but but hold on to that. Yeah, I'm coming to you. Abe also talked about the environment, and that's an area that you are interested in. But I'd like you to speak about what you refer to as the paradox of youthhood in this narrative. There's this seeming dichotomy. It's much more nuanced than that. It's not about celebrations of innovations or these vulnerable youth, and you argue for a dismantling of this bifurcation. Can you speak to that and maybe give us some examples?
Okay, we're still doing the first. Okay.
Yes, we're still doing you and the Black Star.
Yeah.
Karim was playing the Black Star somewhere.
Okay. I'm eager to get to the discussion part of this, because I feel like there are several discussion points coming up. So I'll keep my specific questions response brief. So me and my Ghanaianness, me and my Black Star, I hope I don't trigger a lot of people today, but I think I came into my recognition of, we all grew up, if you were here in our families, you were Ghanaian. The first time I actually started to know what that meant was the first World Cup that Ghana went to, right? That was the first time I constituted being Ghanaian while other people were constituting their Ghanaianness, right? So me saying I was Ghanaian, me defining my Ghanaianness was was a collective definition, right? I'd always define it as, okay, this is me, Ghanaian nationality, here are other people, Ghanaians, nationals, someone else is, Nigerian, South African, Swedish. These were identity formations that were individual, and I knew they were plural, but they were individual. But the first time I constituted it as a collective identity was during things, and I think that World Cup led to a series of opportunities for collective Ghanaian identity. There was the World Cup 2006, and then Camp 2008 that Ghana hosted, and we would get days off school, and I went to a Catholic school, even like the nuns and the priests would have would wear like Ghanaian garb, and so that is when I understood that calling yourself a Ghanaian was both representative of how other people were choosing to define themselves as Ghanaian, or could be isolated from that. Right? That was my first time in constituting that relationally, seeing that series of, if I could include Morigo, we were all, galvanized me to be proud of Kofi Annan. There was some that we were all latching onto together at the same time, right? That is how I began to constitute my Ghanaianness. Fast forward a few years, I go to university in the US, and then my Ghanaianness becomes more ambassadorial, right? You are a representative of Ghana somewhere else, right? And again, this is still coming off of things like World Cup and stuff. So you go to university in America and everyone says, oh, you're from Ghana, that's where Kofi Annan was from, you should be so proud. Or I saw Ghana play at the World Cup and they played the US, so I was so proud of you. And so then I had to situate my Ghanaianness as, am I representative? Am I an ambassador? What does it mean to hold any dissenting voice in that sort of exported idea of what it means to be Ghanaian? How am I going to negotiate? How do I respond to that? Whether I like it or not, when people interact with me, what they see or they hear is a Ghanaian, and I have to represent that in whatever way I either feel beholden to because of the situation I am, or feel beholden to because internally these are sentiments I hold. So whether it's internally I hold shame, but I feel like that shame has to be, we say in Ghana, there are various versions of like you don't air your dirty laundry, right? So then I have to negotiate in what context of my Ghanaianness do I want to toe that line. And so over the years I've had varying versions of negotiating my role as an ambassador of the Black Star narrative. Do I want to destabilize that? Do I want to not touch that? Is it not is it my responsibility or not to carry the story of Ghana with me as an individual? These are all things that young people like us are negotiating, time and time again. Even today, right? Everything Karim has talked about, we even have to negotiate how much we want to, ramble and rant or add caveats in this room to a room of people that are Ghanaian, that are not Ghanaian, that are officially representing forms of media, that are themselves individuals. We are doing that right now as we sit at this table. We're constantly negotiating our role as Ghanaian. So just briefly, that's some of the ways in which I've had to think about myself as a Ghanaian. To the question about how I frame this idea about the paradox of the youthhood, I think I'm extending what Karim has identified as this dichotomy of the two Ghanas. I came at it at this dichotomy of, we confront this dichotomy of two youths in Ghana, right? The youth that are making Ghana proud and we're celebrating their innovations, whether locally or internationally, whether it's about creative innovation art, whether it's about entrepreneurship, whether it's about political action. And then there's like at the underbelly of the Black Star of, youth in Ghana are very vulnerable to various things, whether it's, quality of education, whether it's the future of, ecological catastrophe, whether it's political opportunities available to us. There's this idea that there are two young people in Ghana. You're either struggling and vulnerable to some institutional, whether it's neglect or deficiency of some form, or you are sort of trudging through and you're resilient in that, and you are rules in the thorn bud, your rules in the concrete. And in my work, what I'm trying to work with is what happens in between that, or what happens to all the young people who don't constitute themselves as young people who are vulnerable and in living in a state of precarity, or on the other hand, young people who are looking for opportunity to rise above that. And so, for example, one of the notions that I'm trying to work with in my work is this idea of apathy. So you brought that up, right? The young people, this idea of apathy, right? What do we do if we pay attention to some of these alternative, and I say alternative not because this is the first time we're using them or they don't exist, but in the narratives, we do a lot of streamlining, right? If you line up young people, where do you go? You're either in a state of precarity or you're in the other lane. And there are a lot of young people who don't see themselves in that space, right? Whether it's it manifests as disengagement or cynicism or apathy. These are some of the sentiments that I try to pick up on in my work, because coming from a space of environmental education, the foundation for young people, the narrative is young people make up a big proportion of the African continent. There's a youth bulge where we are heading towards ecological catastrophe. What are we going to do about the young people? They're very vulnerable, but also young people have a lot of energy, and we can harness that. But there are a lot of young people who are like I guess, then the environment is, even to invoke notions of the environment is like, it's not a priority, or what do you mean by that, or there's nothing we can do about it, or, we said all we can say, there's nothing. All these ideas don't neatly fall into those two categories. So what I try to think about in my work about how we educate young people, because that's the entry point, not to say that's my starting point, into environmental education of some form, is the way you attend to people's fears and notions of precarity is very different from the way you attend to people's apathy. And if we assume that young people fall into one of those two buckets in the way we engage with them, whether it's through political action or education or movement building, and we think that young people sit into one bucket or the other, we're going to lose a lot of richness in how young people constitute their livelihoods and their futures. I'll pause there. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Parabia. Manama is next. Maybe I guess the last one in this round. So, Manama, you brought up this concept phrase, I love Ghana. And when I read it, of course, I'm familiar with this phrase, Pidgin, I need to leave Ghana, right? And I remembered how in the 90s, somebody who thought I had clout came to me and said, I should help him to get a visa. And I said, I was just curious, where do you want to go that you think? My mother used to work in the German embassy. Maybe he thought I could help him. He said, anywhere. It's like, I just need to get out. That was in the 90s. And then we sort of came to a moment of, things got better. I remember that my salary was enough for me to buy a ticket to, go someplace. And we're hearing, I love Ghana again. So can you speak to that? And also, people are staying, right? Okay.
Okay. Jump in the Black Star question.
Yes, that's your beginning question.
So I was thinking about what's my relationship to Ghana. I think, yesterday I learned a phrase that there are some people who are like, Africa, my Africa. Like, they're all passionate about Africa. Credit to us. And I think my father was one of those people. So the story I hear is that my grandfather, who had two English names, discovered that I had been named Anama Asante and was appalled because where's my English name? Where's my Christian name? And my father was like, I'm African, and this is how I'm going to name my children. And growing up in that household, he was all about, this is the only place your humanity will be affirmed. And even before I understood what it meant, we would go on road trips and he would point out things to us and say, this is wrong, you should care about your community. And so I think I was sort of formed to think about community because my father cared about community. And then as I fell into journalism and discovered Ghana for myself and realized, oh my God, these are my people. Because while I grew up in Kumasi, fairly middle class, you move around, you're driven. But then the people in my father's village who, when there are emergencies, have to get into church and come to him for money. And so I became a journalist and I actually realized, oh my God, we have not escaped. And so as I think my family is comfortable, it will take just one disease or one tragedy for us to fall back. But not just that, there's so many people that have been left behind. And so when I think of my relationship to Ghana, for me, Ghana is home. It's where in New York, I tell people that I always say I'm seen in Ghana, but I am not seen in New York. And so for me, Ghana is home. It's a place that the orange seller sees me and smiles and asks, Madame, it's saying, and sort of affirms me. So that's my relationship to it. So I think about I left Ghana because of a running conversation between my friends and I. It's not just people who do not have any opportunities, but it's the working professionals. But I think I need to go back and give context that according to the Statistical Service, 59.9% of the population between 15 and 64. And then 36.89% of the population have seen, this is in 2021, so 0 and 14, which for me says we're a very young country. And so most of the people who are online are young people. We're having all sorts of conversations. This is the wonderful thing about Twitter and Twitter Spaces. We can get into a Twitter space and talk from 7 p.m. to 12 midnight about Ghana. And when you are there, you hear things. So it's not just that people are tweeting, I left Ghana. Sometimes it's supposed to convey, look, this is too ridiculous for comment. So somebody would say, the hit in Ghana is why I left Ghana. We recognize that is a joke. They're just making a joke. But when the Minister for Mining said he's depending on the Christian Council to help the fight against illegal mining. I've seen tweets of I left Ghana. They're like, this is just too ridiculous. Then there is a doctor tweeting that today somebody came to the hospital, I could not set their bones because there was no, what's the thing they use for, there's a drug they need and they didn't have it. And his conclusion is, I left Ghana. And so there was a build-up of I left Ghana where people were talking about, look, I live in Takoradi. And again, the thing about social media is that young Ghanaians are talking to each other. So you can live in Kumasi and Takoradi and get into the Twitter space and talk to me who is in Accra and talk to somebody else who's in Takoradi. And they're bringing their narratives and the experiences from where they are located. So we're hearing that there's unemployment in Takoradi. I thought, where the story was sold was that Takoradi was going to be the next Dubai. But people get into Twitter spaces and they're telling us, look, there are no opportunities here, so I'm looking to leave. I want to go to Libya. As somebody said to us in one of those spaces, it's better to die struggling in other people's country than to be here and to be struggling. So there is that happening. But then when you dig deeper, it's not that people want to leave, because we've had conversations, and there was a nurse, I'll share her story. She said, when I graduated, people were leaving, but I wanted to stay. And I've stayed for 8 years, but I've just had it. And when she was asked why she's had it, she said, I got so there are no gloves to work with. The blood pressure machine, people come, and that's all you need. And you have to run around looking for that so you can just do your work. And so for me, I'm going to leave, and that's not because I need the money or, it's just that I can't work. I can't do my work well, and so I want to leave. But if things worked, I would stay, because guess what? I moved from Accra to a place outside Takoradi as a nurse to go and work. And so this should tell you that if things worked in this country, people would stay, and that's the vibe. And the more you talk to them, you get the sense that they do not think Ghana itself. This after I've been telling everybody that some people have been tweeting, the country is done, if you can leave, or Ghana is a bad vibes country, so we should all leave. If you can leave. This, it seems to me like there is a sort of we are in a place where everybody feels pressured. Like somebody says, I went out to buy porridge. They've posted a picture, and this is how much 10 cedis porridge is. Like, there's no way I can go on like this, so I have to leave. And we're getting conversation like, well, we can do something, It's not like we're as powerless as, we're making ourselves seem. And they're like, no, we just have to accept that we have a dictator. As somebody said in a Twitter conversation, we should just accept that we have a dictator. Nothing is going to change. They're not going to listen to the youth. So, if you can get out, this is how you get out. And that, for me, reviews a certain fatalism, like nothing's going to change here. And the way I think about the fatalism is that, people do not know the stories of resistance, that there have been protests, because now on social media, people say protests do not work. There is nothing we can do, protests do not work, we should just close shop and go. So they do not know the stories, and that's because I'm a journalist. We see media has failed. We put politicians who are advocating for anti-gay laws on radio instead of
telling the stories of resistance, because the media cares about what is happening in the economy. They report these stories. What they fail to do is to say this is how other people dealt with it in the 70s and the 60s, or that even the independence struggle was a resistance movement. Young people do not have these examples. Neither do we have. We live on the internet, but for some reason we're sort of in a bubble, and so we're not looking at Chile, for instance. We're not even looking at NSAS and saying we know that the government of Nigeria shut down NSAS, but how do we do it here and make sure that it works? They're not considering all of that. For them, nothing is going to work. We have to close shop. And there are people who are saying, like me, some people who are like, well, all is not well, but there are opportunities here to do good work too. So there are people who are choosing to stay, trying, who believe that they're not going to steal from Ghana. They're just going to be in their corner and do good work. The counter to that from other people is Ghana will happen to you in your corner. So it seems like the odds against us, and we're failing to find or build resistance or find community to organize and demand the change that is required. I don't know where we go from here. The good thing in all of this, even though people say they are leaving, is that wherever Ghanaians are in this moment, they are all angry and raging. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mama. And really, I mean, Karim says he can't look in my eye, but in as much as he talks about there's a certain appearance of fatalism and cynicism, there also isn't. That's why people are still sitting here and doing the work, and it's important. I mean, we'll talk also about this narrative that we do for other people, for the return people. But it's important for us to have that this narrative and this conversation we're having. Okay, so Namibia, you are the youngest person here. You are the one who has most recently left Ghana, but you went to school, so and I know you will come back. So hey, sister. Okay. So you haven't really left in my book. We'll measure that for 5 years from now. But, you propose something about embracing unique voices. So can you speak to something about this, the generative power of fashion, film, music, literature, those kinds of things that you are interested in? So that Karim will cheer up a little bit, so Mama and Yalparibia. Okay, so first I'll discuss my relationship with Ghana and my Ghanaianness. And I think I'll say I have a very love-hate relationship with Ghana. And I think in terms of my Ghanaianness, it's something that I contemplate a lot, because to give some context, being born in South Africa and then growing up there for a few years and then moving back to Ghana, it's always been a question of, am I Ghanaian enough? Especially taking into consideration the fact that I don't speak Chi at the moment, and that has become a limitation, because a lot of people be like, how can your name be Yamin Bianfojo and you don't speak Chi? It doesn't make sense for a lot of people, and then you get into conversations with people and they'll be like, oh wow, you're such a disgrace to Ghana, yeah, and how can you not speak Chi? Your parents failed you, and a lot of those type of conversations where it's like, okay, maybe I don't have the right to be in Ghana and to speak on Ghanaian issues because I don't live up to the standard of Ghanaianness, which seems to be set, I don't know by who, but just a standard that exists. And so I think that's what I would say in terms of my Ghanaianness. But then in contrast, when it comes to my relationship with Ghana, I feel like Ghana is home, and even though I've been in school for just a few days, not even years, I think it just solidified the fact that no matter where you run to, no matter where you go, there's just something in Ghana that you cannot find anywhere else, despite maybe not feeling like
I am Ghanaian enough. And so for me, I think what helped me to figure out my space in Ghana and in being Ghanaian was definitely my relationship with history and the ability to engage with Ghanaian history and learn about different things, learn about the independence movement or research about Rawlings and the PNDC and all those different moments in history, learning about them and being able to discuss with various people or talk to people who may not know about them and quote unquote educate them on the things that I have learned from my personal research helped me to reconstitute what it means to me in relation to my Ghanaianness. And then aside from the history, I'd also say the arts, which I'll get into once I'm answering the other question more. I'll say that the art and being able to look to different young Ghanaian artists, and I'll say the people that I am surrounded with, because I think that I'm blessed to be around so many young creative people, and when I see what they produce, it has this distinct Ghanaianness to it. It may not be like outwardly defined as, oh, this is Ghanaian, but because of who they are and being raised in Ghana, it does have that distinct Ghanaianness. And being able to connect with creative people, being able to read certain literature just helped to just solidify my identity as a young Ghanaian. Yeah. So in relation to that and in relation to the question about uplifting like unique voices and how I believe that will help to truly reimagine the Black Star, as I stated, and just uplift Ghana, especially in this period of time where it feels like everything is hopeless. And unfortunately, even though I'm the youngest person, I think I'm the only Gen Z.
Oh, yeah, ouch.
Yes, I'm the only Gen Z member of this panel, and I think, unfortunately, I don't have an extremely optimistic voice at the moment to say, oh yes, as for the Gen Z, we really feel like Ghana is going to, make a return and we're going to change Ghana, because unfortunately, speaking to a lot of my friends, that's not the narrative that we have, or seeing what people are saying on Twitter, that's not the narrative we have as Gen Z, which is people from 10 to 25. Yeah. It's unfortunate, but sorry. It's unfortunate, but a lot of people have that same I for left Ghana mentality, where it's like, okay, the country isn't doing well, so as soon as I'm 18, I'm gone. And unfortunately, everyone has the privilege of even thinking about that. But the people who do, and the people who may be seen as the potential change makers, unfortunately, that's where their heads are at. I had a friend who told me that he thinks we should, please don't be offended. He thinks that we should kill everyone over 65 because
Wow, I have a few years to go.
Because generally the feeling is that it's just difficult to justify to a lot of young people at the moment why they should give up on their individual dreams and aspirations in the hopes of fixing a country that, metaphorically, I'll say, is burning around us. We feel as though like the generations before us are constantly passing down this mantle of, okay, so now it's your turn to fix the country. And at this point in time, especially with social media and the ability to engage with things, not just on a national level, but on a global level, and see the innovation and see what people are able to achieve, it's so hard to tell someone that they should put a halt on that because they have a country to fix, especially standing at the point of being independent for 65 years. It's a difficult conversation to have with a lot of young people. And so in relation to the unique voices and then the creative innovation, I think that is a point in which we can find, and like this is to take from what she was talking about in terms of the collective Ghanaian identity, because I feel like for the youth at the moment, or for my generation, that's something that seems to be lost. There isn't much that we look to and we're so proud to be Ghanaian and feel that we have a motivation and a burden to continue the work of Kwame Nkrumah or the various protests and movements that were taking place in the 70s and the 60s, because we don't feel like there's something to hold on to. And so, as I stated before, it feels like I left Ghana, but taking into consideration that people have different perspectives of what it means to be Ghanaian, like myself, if we lean more into funding, marketing, and just supporting different voices, I think it will help a lot of people to find their space in Ghana and connect with something that is worth saving or worth fighting for. So I think that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much, Nubia. I'll do one last bit and then we'll leave about 35 minutes for you guys. It's almost 20 to 3. And take this any way which you want, and please alert me when Nikita also wants to speak. So we have this Global Ghana in Search of Africa's Black Star, and the fact that the word search is there suggests that the Black Star isn't, that obviously hovering, and a lot of that has come out from your conversation. It also signals for us something that Nanama had pointed to about who is speaking for Ghana, who is allowed to speak for Ghana, and the discomfort we sometimes have about the quote-unquote airing certain women in public. And there are people who are not from Ghana but who have a very vested interest in a particular narrative about Ghana for sentimental reasons or whatever. They've been connected with this space, and they have certain memories of a certain Ghana that there's, discomfort about having that, shattered, right? And as I was listening to you all, I was wondering, and I don't want to date this in relation to any particular, government or particular political period, would I be, and especially to those of you who are, we can leave Nubia out, but sure. If we had this conversation 5, 6, 8, 10 years ago, do you think you would be saying similar things as you have said today? I remember somebody who was a dual citizen of the U.S. and Ghana, and during the elections in the U.S., were teasing and saying, hey, this is your new president. She said, hey, no, this is not my president. Another is my president. And then she comes here and she's whinging, and I say, oh, but Nana is your president. She said, I don't have a president. The US one that I have gone, the Ghana one that I have gone. So this was a change in her perspective over just a 4-year period, right? So, would any of you reflect on, do you feel like this is just a moment? And also speak to this issue of voices. Who are we speaking for? We are speaking to each other. We are also thinking of, our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, right? Yeah. So everybody take it. Please let me know when Nikita wants to speak.
Okay.
Her hand is up. Okay, so let's let Nikita go and then we'll come here. And if each of you could take, like whoever wants to speak, maybe some 2-3 minutes, and then we'll open it up to the floor.
So I don't want you to be turning your head, so I'll just go first and then the others can all speak then. I actually have a story about this. I belong to a WhatsApp group of mostly people who are dual citizens, whose parents are Ghanaian but left Ghana in the 70s and 80s, and so we lived their lives outside and moved back to Ghana, in this, when we had the Ghana Rising narrative, really. And one of the things that always stood out to me in this group, because I have a Ghanaian passport, so really I'm in Ghana. There are not that many places that I can go to freely. And one thing that always stood out to me was the conversation of some of them who said, the thing is that we are here now because we do feel that we're entitled to gaining from Ghana at this moment because our parents sacrificed for us, they left and we gained. But we can leave whenever we want to because we're actually not fully Ghanaian. We can be Ghanaian and constituted Ghanaians now when we want, but we can leave because we have the markers that allow us to leave, passports and visas. And this was always very interesting for me because this was a conversation from 4 or 5 years ago. And now in this very same group, which a lot of them have left in the last few months because they came to Ghana to participate in a growing economy, to participate in, especially taking advantage of the year of return and what it meant for the diaspora. But in the last few months, a lot of them have left. And one of the things that they keep saying is that maybe we left because we can leave. We have the ability to leave. And so being Ghanaian is something that we can take advantage of, that we don't have to struggle with the rest of you and we don't have to do this. And I found this very interesting because I do think that the conversation has changed, and I do think that if we had this discussion a few years ago, some of the topics, like something that what Karen talked about, this thing of IFLF Ghana, would still be there. It will not be as further as it is now, but it will still be there because I think that even then we could still see that the narrative that we were being fed about Ghana was not the whole narrative, and that it was getting worse. And just in the sense that there was this euphoria, so we could still think that things were getting better. And so I do think that when we think about some of the things that were happening, if you think about this anti-gay bill, which has been introduced to Parliament, there were already the seeds that were being thrown then. And so we have things that were already existing, just not as magnified as it is now. And I think that what is most obvious now is the fact that those who can leave, those who have the privilege to leave, those who have the privilege to not be in the trenches, get to do that. Get to change the narrative of who they are, get to change the narrative of what Ghana is to them, whilst others don't have this choice, others don't have this privilege. And so I do think that if we had this conversation a few years ago, we would signal this, but it would not be as perhaps fatalistic as it is now. But I also wanted to make a point about something that you said about protest, about the apathy of young people, and about how a lot of young people are not aware of protest. There's something that I noticed this year that I found very interesting was the elections in the universities, how the elections are being run. So the way the posters are being made for elections for SRC, even something like the hall presidents, the posters that are being made, the campaigns that they're running. When I was in the University of Ghana 2008, it was not like that. But I do feel that we can see the way in which the bigger elections that we have for presidential elections, the way that they are run has fed into the psyche of young people, even in the universities, and the way they run those elections. And so the sense of young people in the universities, in tertiary education, in high schools, the sense of them being different, the sense of them creating a world for their own, I think it's different because now those elections which feed into the psyche about how to run the country. So how do you run a university like a microcosm of a country is the same narrative, it's the same mentality of getting into the into the elections with some kind of backing, and then becoming the SRC president, and then being able to recoup what has been put into the campaign. And so these campaigns that are being run, even in the high schools. I mean, I have a friend who has a brother who was running, who said, "I'm going to give all of you candy now, so you vote for me." It was just in a junior high school. And I was really surprised, because there's mentality in junior high school that I can win the election by buying all of you candy, and then when I win, I can do something for you. I find that this relates directly to this idea of protest among young people, because the mentality is, I think it's very different now from the way it was in the 70s and 80s. Yeah.
Okay. 2-3 minutes, Max. Thank you.
You had two questions. The two questions I heard were who has the right to speak about Ghana, and would we have been speaking this way a couple of years ago? So what I think I want to say that is different, or what I'm going to say that's different about now versus a decade ago, is what I'm noticing is Ghanaians have sort of lost the voice in the story about Ghana as the black star, right? The story has sort of been you talk about the choreographed year of return, a lot of Ghanaian, non-Ghanaian celebrities, so people who have either parentage in Ghana or were born in Ghana at some point, we're hearing about them more and more, are bringing films to Ghana. The presidents, whether current or previous, they go abroad and people talk about Ghana in the media. Ghana is in the news. Ghanaian artists are collaborating, concerts, and Ghanaians I think are holding their mic and are like, hello. So and that's getting drowned out in all the new voices that are talking about Ghana today, that we're not talking about Ghana as loudly before, right? So whether it's Beyonce does a music video in Ghana and everyone's like, oh my God, this is amazing, and Ghanaians say, well, but also, and that microphone is off, right? And so I think a lot of the frustration I see, even if it's not new, it's like we're screaming into a void where we're trying to compete with all the millions of complimentary and glorifying stories about Ghana, which we would probably not be as stressed about 8 years ago if the story was a bit more balanced, right? But I also understand, the plethora of all the pro-Ghana, pro-Africa stories are also responding to, right before that, people were begrudged by all the, to the cliche of, Africa is not, we went through an Africa is not a country phase, right? We went through, and now everyone says that, Africa is not a country, and everybody says, well, now we all know that. And now it's like Ghana, everyone says, why is everyone hosting their concert in Ghana? Why is everyone going to Ghana for Christmas? And Ghanaians are saying, we're also, there's this other side that doesn't get talked about as much, and people, I think, are frustrated by that. Yeah.
So would we have, would I have made these comments? So I think back to 2016, just before 2015, a bunch of my friends were leaving, and I remember Kina is here. I remember I would go home and tell my uncles or my relatives that, oh, my friends are leaving. I would be heartbroken. And I knew things were bad then, and so people were leaving. And then the election happened. There was a collective sigh of relief. Everybody thought, we're going to be on our way now. Things are going to get better. And then we can't recognize the country. So I said, Kina is here, because for as long as I've known Kina, she would tell us a story and she would say, I've lost the country. Guys, in the 70s, I've lost a country. And we couldn't relate. We didn't, which country? I mean, this country is not working, but it's okay. The cost of living is high, but we can manage. We have to pay 2 years rent advance, but it's okay. But now, first of all, if you have to pay 2 years rent advance is tied to the dollar, you can't. And so I feel right now that I am losing a country. This is the moment. So whereas in 2015 I was heartbroken and sad, I wasn't eager to leave. I didn't want to go anywhere. But now I'm like, my goodness, I I want that country, I want that period back. And then on the who gets to speak for Ghana. So I like what you said, that we're shouting into a void. We're trying to say, look guys, you can come to Ghana, enjoy Ghana, have your fun, but this thing where you speak over Ghanaians and you raise our experiences. So, and it's not just Ghanaians who do that, it's Westerners, it's Black Americans, and that creates some sort of tension, especially on Twitter, where there's resentment. I think for those who know, they remember the Irie incident. This musician came to Ghana and she just posted a tweet where like, I'm in Ghana, I'm having fun. And people just went in on her and dragged her. And I think she was just a rights victim, because people have been building it up, because celebrities will come, they go to the presidency, take pictures. I went to lunch with the president of Ghana. This president doesn't speak to Ghanaians. He's not addressed us. He's not addressing us during COVID, but since this crisis, he's not talked to us. So people who, yeah. We wait to see at the brink of collapse. So people who booed him at the Global Citizen Concert. I was asking people, and people were saying, well, he hasn't spoken to us. Why don't you show up? We're trying to release tension, and he's destroyed our country. We've gathered to have a bit of fun, and he's showing up to say what? And the president did a thing where when he realized he was being booed, he switched languages. He spoke Chi, and that was to tell the crowd that, guys, people are watching, foreigners are, because we don't like watching our dirty linen. But the people were like, this is precisely why we want to embarrass you. We want people to know that you're not delivering. And so there are tensions right now, because people are like, the president of Ghana, oh my God, he's articulate, his policies, and you're like, I come from Ghana, look. They're like, no, he's better than the president of Uganda. I'm like, no, it's like that. So, yeah, I just wish people would let us have our say, that we live here, we're going through a thing. People can come and enjoy the country. We understand people should come. But this thing where Ghana is excellent, you're lying. You're coming with dollars, so you can afford the fancy hotels. We can't. We drive on bad roads. If something happens, I say this all the time, something happens in an emergency in Marriage or Hatch or someplace, an ambulance isn't coming. So this idea that Ghana is excellence for us, I think we are over it. We are tired of pretending.
So I just want to very quickly, because Yao Paraba has mentioned it, Nanama has also mentioned it, so because I had it also here, about voices and who's speaking and all of that. I won't say anything more than Nanama has said, but just to bring that tweet for you to, if you missed it. So when Lemus was here in Ghana, this is what she tweeted, a couple of things. First, she remarked that Ghana was the most beautiful country in the world. And then went ahead to also add, quote, wow, it's a rare and good feeling to consistently wake up with peace and happiness. I really owe that to Ghana. And I don't know how long it will last, but I'll cling onto this, end quote. And that's not all. She added, quote, depression and anxiety is not fun. It's truly nice to get a break from it. This is Ghana. I'll never forget suddenly crying the first time going to a beach in Ghana. It was so triggering, and I didn't feel alone. My heart ached for my ancestors. It was a surreal experience, end quote. And then this was a response. A couple of them came, but this particular one was also very important. This person said, quote, this woman thinks she's in Wakanda. This is too corny, OMG, end quote. And for me, that's what, it goes back to the point I made earlier, that there's one Ghana that looks at or cuts the diaspora. And so from Panel Fest to the Joseph Project to, many other things, Year of Return recently. Our president, when George Floyd died in that very tragic way, we organized a funeral here in Ghana. Just around the same time, there was a young man in Ashaman who had been killed. His name is Eric Ofuchu, who had been killed by a military officer, whoever. Nothing. His family would do a funeral for him, but nothing. Around the same period, we had our election, 8 people died, absolutely nothing. still in Ghana, we have a constituency in Ghana today that has no representation in parliament, but we have a human rights president. So that is the reality of Ghanaians in many ways. On very quickly, the question of whether or not 10 years ago this conversation would be different, I disagree that it would be any different. In my personal experience, it is only also because we have, as we grow and get more conscious and engage the issues and all of that, we get to integrate ourselves in it more and get more voice. And that is what really has changed. Because 10 years ago is 2012. I mean, 2012 was not so great. And for me, 10 years ago also, and just to quickly, because I passed on my right to talk about my own interaction with Ghana and all of that. 10 years ago also, or maybe 11, I was in high school, and I remember there was a time when we were talking and making noise in class, as we always do. My social studies madam was angry. My name is Abdul Karim Ibrahim, obviously. It gives a certain view that I come from northern Ghana. I have absolutely no idea where northern Ghana I come from. I was born in Mampontein in Kumasi. My mother is Asante. My mother's clan is the clan from which the Asantehene, and all of that. And I also have a name, Nana Kwame Ajim. But my social studies madam, when I was talking in class, shut me up and said, I should be grateful that I'm in the class because my peers are in the north herding cattle. So that is also my relationship and interaction with Ghana, depending on where I am. So when I'm in Ghana, that is how often times I experience Ghana. But when I'm in Ghana and I'm talking to Blessing from South Africa, it is different. I talk to Blessing about Ghana in a very comparative sense. So I'm curious to know what is happening in South Africa. When I'm in Nigeria with my friends, it is the same comparative sense. Sometimes there's a bit of competition here and there over jollof and football and all. But that is it. So I don't have a certain one Ghana feel. Depends on who I'm talking to, where I am, and things like that. Yes.
Thanks, Karim. Nunubia, would you like to say anything?
Okay, so in relation to the conversation about the year of return and who is allowed to speak about Ghana and who isn't, essentially, I think personally, for me, the year of return turned out to be somewhat of a disappointment, only because I think actually what y'all was saying, like for Ghanaians, and especially young Ghanaians, who may not have the privilege to be able to engage with the year of return, I think it really shut a lot of people out. And I think that the government and unfortunately the president kind of play into that and projecting and packaging Ghana in a certain light to give off this feeling of extreme development, and Ghana is so peaceful and we've come such a long way and we're the beacon of African emancipation, which I mean we are to some extent, but it doesn't help with uplifting the young voices because they feel as though this is not something that they can partake in. And I think even with the continuation of the year of return, when you look at the prices of most of these concerts, especially considering that these concerts aren't government run, they are from individual institutions who are coming to host these concerts, for instance, like Afro Nation, and then you have the president endorsing it and saying that, oh yes, Afro Nation will be continuing in Ghana for this amount of years, but then the actual youth who should be engaging with these concerts and enjoying them aren't even able to afford them, because at this moment in time, when you look at the Ghana, the CD to dollar rates, and then you're charging the youth $200 to go and see a concert, it doesn't make sense. And in a lot of ways, I feel like it's almost tone deaf, especially coming from the people who are supposed to be running the country. And so in a lot of ways, I think it's just breeding a lot of discontent. And I don't know how that will manifest whether it will be peaceful or not be peaceful, or it will come about in the manner of protest or not. But I think it's just interesting to consider.
Thank you all very much. We started about 5-10 minutes late, so we have about a half hour for you guys to engage with us. Please raise your hand. I'll take about 3 first. Let us know who you are and keep it cryptic so we can have as many people as possible. Okay, I've seen 4 hands, so I'll take the 4. Kina, Jean, gentleman in the Blackberry, and my boss from Sharjah.
Thank you. Wow. Just maybe 2 comments. I think that the topic, Global Ghana in Search of Africa's Black Star, is a big one. I think this is going to sound odd. We should be fine with the different Ghanas. You know, I'm working on Kwaranse's biography, and if you talk to any of that generation, especially somebody like him who left Ghana to go and do some training in the West around in the 1960s. This Black Star thing is so huge, and the way in which we started out as a country, it's never actually ever going to go away, and it's not something we should wish it to go away. We should expect that people will come here and make those kinds of statements. That does not mean that it negates what we are going through here. I am very happy when African Americans, of course I know that it's mostly celebrities, but any black person who comes to Ghana and they find a measure of peace, it's not something we should take lightly. We shouldn't dismiss it. Because, you know, we are the Black Star of Africa. That's not going to go away. No matter what we think. We, being the best versions of ourselves, it's not a place that we reach. It's a state of being. And we haven't even started. Now, we are just dealing with some, you know, a lot of nation wrecking by some people continually, right? But the place we should be after independence to reimagine ourselves, we haven't even started. So in fact, we will always be losing a Ghana. So if the Gen Zs are fed up with us, which you should be, what is actually going to happen is we will recover, and the next generation after you will lose that Ghana too, until we find ourselves in the place where we are doing the work of what this blacks. It's an aspirational thing. I'm not here to give us hope. I'm just telling you.
Please give us hope. Why?
But I'm just saying that, you know, and we mustn't. We are 60 years past independence, yes, but decolonization, we have to be decolonized before we even get to imagining ourselves differently. We are actually still maybe 13th March 1957. We haven't done the work. The work hasn't even started. Like it started, it was truncated. And there is no blueprint anywhere in this world for where Ghana must take itself and therefore drag Africa along with it. Do you see? So yeah, it's hard when you talk like this, when you know that there are every single minute lives are being compromised. People are dying in this country. But we should not ever begrudge anybody, any black person from anywhere in this world who comes here and they say the next morning they found peace. Because actually I think that it happens to a lot of people in Ghana when they come to Ghana, and possibly Dakar. It happened to me in Dakar. And again, I know what my Senegalese sisters and brothers are going through, but there's just something really, you know, even when you leave this country, even when I go to Nigeria, I get so happy. So we mustn't begrudge that. Because it's work that we have to do. We are called forth. I know we are to save ourselves, build a better nation and a way of being. Our coat of arms says freedom and justice for our people, but we are also to be the place where our other people were supposed to come back home and rest. That means the Black Star is aspirational. These people who are currently our leaders, they are taking advantage of that. They were not the ones to have done the year of return. They did it very badly. Because really, what you talk about, the fairs, I mean, it should have been an exchange between young people in Ghana and young people from there, and who can afford these prices. Even I can't, right? So that's just all I want to tell us.
Thank you, Kina. Thank you very much. I hope, thank you. Jean.
I have a kind of ridiculous question for which I apologize in advance. But I would be really interested to hear what you mean by young people. What is your definition of youth? Because I was so surprised to hear Gen Z evoked. Because in all of the years I've been here, coming here, youth is, I was going to say it's a state of mind. It's not. It's classed. It's about place. It's about job. It's about marriage status. And so I'm interested in how it's being deployed today, and are we entering some new sort of transnational definition of youth? I think about, the Nkwankwa, veranda boys, and all of these kinds of terms that were used historically to describe, I think, what's youth. So anybody on the panel, I would, because there's quite an age difference, and it's enough that you're a youth. Almost. Okay. So anyway, anything that anybody could contribute to that, because I think by interrogating the very concept, it might help open up the conversation a bit, maybe.
Thanks very much. Blackberry behind you. Please brief to the point. Please remind the audience who you are. Not everybody has.
The name is Sibawe from KNUST. A classmate of mine who was quite radical like many of our youth once said we should all, that was in about 1970 something, in the 70s. He said we should sell Ghana, share the money and leave. Yeah. So today I'm hearing something similar to that all those above 65, they should kill them off. You see, but I want to give hope to the youth. You want to live, where are you going to live to? And do you think that place is better? As we say in Ghanaian parlance, nowhere cool. And there's nowhere like home. Remember the Fati story? No, she left, and she didn't find it easy. She came back, and she's succeeding, at least she's happy. Remember also the story of Abdullah? He left, he struggled, he's come back, and he's making it. So even if you leave, you would want to come back one day. You are coming back to dear old Ghana. So, and Abdul Karim, yes, Abdul Karim Ibrahim, he said everybody wants to leave. It's not true. Many don't want to leave.
I'm not sure he said that though, but if you can. No,
I think he said that. I wrote it down. I wrote that everybody wants to leave. He didn't pay so much attention to that. And also when you mentioned that the chief imam is the biggest image launderer, and I wrote that down, so don't say you didn't say it. I want you to understand that people like that, we need them. Yeah, we need people like that because they keep us together as Ghanaians. So what do you want to see done so that you can help the youth to feel that Ghana is the black star of Africa? That's to all of you.
Okay, and Binyam gets the last word on this round. I hope that we'll be able to do one more round.
Thank you very much. My name is Binyam. I'm from the Africa Institute, and I know very little about Ghana, and I apologize if my question isn't relevant enough. It's very much connected to the last point that my colleague has just raised. It seems in all the conversations, living is sort of, assumed as a solution to the problem that we all are in. I really appreciate the frank discussions that is happening. I don't think it's happening in many places, and that's very relevant. But with all the conversations, I had an assumption. There is an assumption that living is a solution. I think some of you mentioned that it's not that we all can live. It's not everyone that can live, even if it's a solution. And second, where do we live to? Do we really have a place that we're welcomed, a place that we can really go to and accept it? And there's so the point is, if this discussion is also merged, with living where we live too, I think it makes the discussion very rich. And probably it may suggest that another way is also, we have nowhere to live. Maybe we have to find some solutions where we are, because we are not accepted anywhere. So that's just for discussion.
Okay,
Thank you.
so if everyone responds cryptically, then we can take one more round before we close. Okay.
I know I talked about I for left Ghana, and there's a general sense that people want to leave, but the reason I'm bringing I for left Ghana up is also that it's so that people want to leave. It's a sense of despair, because they do know that not all of them can leave. Look, we ran out of booklets for passports even, so they know that they can't leave. They do know that racism exists. They know about visa struggles. There's frustration. There is. I just want an outlet. So we do know. We recognize that we're not welcome in certain places. We may be able to live in those places, but it's also never going to be home for us. We do know all of these things. And I think the reason why these conversations are important is because we recognize that this is talking is part of the work, because it's in talking that ideas come forth, and that we can sort of move forward. So I know that when we're saying young people want to leave, many of them do want to leave, but they also do know that we can't empty out the country. Besides, I say the most alarmed and worried people are Ghanaians abroad, because that's all we do, talking about Ghana. I mean, if it was easy to leave and forget your country, why are you calling somebody at 5 a.m. just to talk about some nonsense you heard on the radio, and you are not even in Ghana? So we do know, we don't want to go. This is why we're participating in this. We don't want to go, we want to be home. For most people, they want to be here. There's joy here. I mean, if you land, there's a feeling we get. I think that most people know when they get home. There's a feeling we get when we get here. So people don't want to go, which is why Afro Left Ghana is deployed in different ways. That's like, we're so frustrated, we need an outlet, and if we could leave, we will leave. But ideally, we don't want to go.
Thank you, Nana. And thank you all for your questions. Dr. Allman, I'll take your question. I think your question is the answer, right? That the youth, sorry, I sound like a teacher. You tell us the answer. The youth status is a moving target, right? And it should stay a moving target because it like you says, it manifests in different places. But I think maybe the one thing, or seven, that sort of mediates that moving target is the question of power, right? It's wherever in a space, when you enter a space where, like in that relation of power, someone has more power than you, someone shifts across the youth, non-youth divide, right? So in churches, I use church as an example, the married, unmarried divide, like the social capital that comes with being a married person gives you some kind of power. So you have like youth groups where people of the same age, some are in women's fellowship because they are married, and some are in the youth group. So this is not a complete answer to your question, but some of the ways that people constitute, where do we draw the line of who is a young person and who is not a young person, is in the different spaces that they enter. Are they what power are they able to enact? And so when we say like a lot of young people, when we use that a lot of young people, it's all the people who are feeling sort of a collective powerlessness in relation to their political action, because we've talked a lot about politics, or their voice in global Ghana's in description. So then they become the youth in that context, because they are the ones who don't have
ability to pay 2 years rent advance.
2 years, right? So yeah. So yes, I think it's power.
Okay, so I think first I'll respond to the first comment that was made in relation to the aspirational nature of the Black Star. I think that that is extremely true, and I feel like decolonization is a continuous process that so many African countries are still going through, including Ghana. And I think that it will take multiple generations to get us to the point where we are standing in the definition of this black star that we keep on talking about. But I think it also will take a lot of selflessness and sacrifice, which is something that I think a lot of people are finding hard to come to terms with, because economically it can't change overnight, unfortunately. And for a lot of the youth, I think there's a lot of apathy, which I think was mentioned already, because you talk to people and you complain about Ghana and you go back and forth, and then, for instance, one time I just asked my friends, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And there was just silence, because generally you don't feel that you have the capacity to do much and to actually add to the collective change that needs to happen, and the waiting period that needs to happen before we see like the economic emancipation, I would say. And then I also want to respond to the last two questions, which I think were very similar, which was about where are we going to, and also how. No, not. Yeah. Okay, like where are we leaving to, and then also thinking about potential solutions, and then also connecting it to embracing the different types of Ghanaians that may be seen around us. In terms of where are we going to leave, I think for a lot of people, which has already been stated, especially even from the first panel in the morning, for most people it's not about where are you going, it's just about going somewhere else. And that's just the unfortunate reality. But then the truth of the matter is, as you stated, that there is actually nowhere that you can go where you get the same feeling of home as Ghana. And at the same time, I think as much as there are different Ghanaians, and we need to embrace that and embrace the different identities that people have cultivated from the environments that they've grown up in and the Ghanaians that they've experienced, I think it shouldn't be to the disadvantage of another group of Ghanaians, because at the same time that we embrace the various Ghanas that we have, in some senses we're forgetting about some of the other Ghanaians, and sometimes they may feel that the government or the people are only feeding into a certain narrative of Ghana, and that doesn't help us collectively to move forward. Because if you have people who are like, oh, it doesn't matter because I can get up and leave anyways, and I can come to Ghana when it benefits me, that narrative, although it may be their reality, is not very beneficial, because there are people who are still going to be here and who can just not leave. Like, it's not even an option for them. And so if we're feeding into that idea, then what happens to the people who are left behind? And then in terms, sorry.
Can I cut you and let Karim come in, because there's some very specific questions for him. We started about 10 minutes late, but maybe instead of taking the extra 10, we'll take an extra 5 after our 3:30 mark. So, Karim.
So maybe the first thing I would do is to just respond to Kina's remarks earlier. I mean, some part of it has been addressed, but I also think that part of accepting the different Ghanaians is also to accept that there could be some contrarian views, sometimes even very, very rambunctious, and I think that all of those are also very, very important. And I really appreciate the point that Kina makes, but the other element of that also is that nobody wants to be the martyr for what they imagined and aspired Ghana, aspirational Ghana would be like. So if you have come from a family, for instance, where the story is that the generations before you, your parents, your grandparents, have always been in that same difficulty, it is hard, really, to embrace this aspirational Ghana, where you see something bigger than yourself, where you are ready to at least die in the process for it so that your blood fuels that. I think for me, I think that's the sort of sentiment that one gets. And so not everybody gets very optimistic like that. And for me, those who are not as optimistic are equally important. Otherwise, we fall into a slumber where we sometimes think that, okay, we are there or we will get there. We need to run. And those who think we need to run must articulate it as forcefully as possible. And I think it's quite evident in how, like, I even speak and all. So I will address, and I do that on purpose also. I would address, I'm sorry, sir, I don't know your name, but I would, So the point about the National Chief Imam and the essence of the institution, I completely agree. But also, very similar to the point that I just made, his office and he as an individual, represents so much, including like the peace, holding the peace of this country and all of that. But we must also ask ourselves, really, that the peace on the back of what? So if you uphold a certain peace and believe that peace is a group of people or many people rambling and feeling the pain and all of that, at some point it will break. And when it does, everybody goes down with it. And for me, I think it is important, and that's what I told Prof earlier that it should allow us to do, to allow us to question the normative views on good or bad in a way that says that even issues of violence, right, we shouldn't just accept that violence is bad because violence is bad. But why is violence bad? And given the periods that we are going through, sometimes they look very radical, maybe you have seen some before and it didn't end well. That's fine, we'll take the advice. But we need to also allow that room for us to, finally, the Chief Imam's office, for instance. Very recently, Wesley Girls High School matter came up. People told very harrowing stories about Muslim women or girls there and how they are unable to practice their faith. There are those who rest on their bed just to pray and create an impression that they are not praying. There are those who got to the entrance of Wesley Girls and they were made to send, their parents were made to send their Quran or prayer mats back home, among many other things. I went to a community school in Ghana. That was not a Christian school. I was the head boy, but one of the problems that I had was because I didn't like going to church. So I had to sing in church to get the buy-in of many people. If there's an institution like the Chief Imam, which people refer to all the time to tell stories about how Ghanaian Muslims are different and exceptional and all of that, then I have a problem because the Chief Imam and his office and the people around him, they don't feel the same things that I feel. And so it is not enough to like the idea that the Chief Imam is not perhaps something like Mohammed bin Salman, or he's not Shekau who was leading Boko Haram, and so I should be grateful. It's fine. But we need to talk about this also so that we don't create the impression that all is good and well, because it is not.
Okay, Nikita wants to say a few words, and we may have to bring the curtain down after that, so I will not see the people who are eyeing me whose hands were up, but Nikita, please speak. Okay,
I wanted to address the two questions of the category of youth and also the question of, I for left of everyone leaving. I think that relating to what Narama said of the term I for left being one of despair and being one of it even as a way to signal what it means to constitute being part of Ghana at the moment. I just moved back to Ghana after 10 years of living in Germany, and my return to Ghana was largely mitigated by medical racism. But my move was also underscored by the privilege of knowing that I would have a job in the university when I would come back home. And so I think that the question of migration it's a quite sensitive topic because some people leave because they have no choice. And I always come back to this poem by Washan Shah where she says, no one leaves home unless home is a shark that is ready to devour you. And this is important when we think about this category of youth, because part of the shifting idea or the shifting range of what youth is a lot to do with the fact that a lot of young people are simply being robbed of this ability to be called youth at the moment. And so relating to what was said earlier about the use of power to categorize youth, and so if you think about children who have to get married early, children who have to drop out of school to be mothers, the girls who have to drop out of school to be mothers, this category of being a youth is being robbed of this category early, and being forced into this adult age category earlier than they're supposed to be. And so this category of youth ends up a very shifting category that in this age of social media makes it even more different, because the ability to have such conversations about what it means to be a youth becomes far more expanded, that Gen Zs are able to participate in this conversation and in these narratives. But I do think that in this question of migration, that it has a lot to do with one's dependence and one's privilege, and this question of privilege in the sense of even being able to travel legally and not being able to travel legally. So the routes that one can even use to travel, the routes that one can even go away with. And I think it's also important that we think about migration not always as a way of people just leaving and going somewhere, but the people move away, to go to school for a year or two and come back, and some stay for longer, have families and never come back. And the different types of migration and the different forms of migration, I think, are also important for the growth of a nation, because think about Kwame Nkrumah and a lot of these leaders, a lot of their sense of being Ghanaian and the sense of fighting for independence was formed by being away from Ghana. And I think this is a very important idea that I think Yahoo talked about constituting Ghanaians outside of Ghana. And I think this is a very important form that we always tend to think of leaving as always almost negative. But I think that there's a sense of reshaping what is at home and reshaping Ghana through those who live and constitute what Ghana is or what Ghana can be, or as I talked about, the memory of what Ghana was even. I think it's these different forms of migration I important to think about when we think about the generalized sense of people wanting to leave or FLF. There are lots of different ideas within this generalized I for left Ghana that come up, and also like Nana mentioned earlier, even some just as a joke, just using it as a joke to talk about the despair of being in the country at the moment.
Thank you very much, Nikita. There's often a cliche that somebody speaks and then the facilitator says, oh, that's an excellent point on which to end. But I genuinely believe that Nikita's comment is an excellent place for us to bring the curtain down here. And I cannot possibly express my appreciation to panelists, Nikita, the two Yas, and good... Mama Kwame Karim here, and it is precisely for what we have engaged in that I picked on these individuals to have this not easy, I'm not saying difficult, this not easy conversation, because it is an important conversation for us to have. So thank you all very, very much. Thank you to those of you on the other side. My apologies to people who wanted to contribute to this conversation and I could not give you an opportunity, but our panelists are here. I know we need to move somewhere else, so we might not have that much time to talk here, but they are all available. Get there. As for Nanama, you can find her. Just have conversations with them when we leave here. So thank you all very, very much. And we love your energy. And in as much as all that has been said, again, this is not a cliche, but it does give me hope listening to you guys. Seriously. Thank you very much.